The purl stitch is knit stitch's opposite in almost every way, but if worked alone, purl stitch will look exactly the same as knit stitch. They both make garter stitch. It's when you combine knitting and purling that you really get to see the magic of knitting. To begin, make a slip knot and then long tail cast on until you get to 15 total stitches. If you need help with any of these techniques, just look for the links in the description box below. Now that we've cast on our 15 stitches, we are ready to begin purling. Just take this needle full of stitches and place it in your left hand. Then you're free to pick up the empty needle with your right hand. With purling, we're always going to think about being in the front. So we want this yarn that we're going to work with from the ball coming to the front. I'll show you how to pick it up with your left hand in just a second. All right, let's begin our purl stitch. With your right-handed needle, you're going to go into this first stitch from right to left and cross in the front. So insert the stitch from the right and cross in the front. See that again, coming from the right hand side, go into the first stitch and cross to the front. Let's see that again from the top. From the right hand side, go into the first stitch and cross to the front. Now we need to pick up our yarn in order to make the purl stitch. Now, what makes purling continental so difficult is our tension is going in the opposite direction. So go ahead and take your right hand and pinch onto those needles. Now we need to pick up our yarn. Now we're not going to pick it up and pull it back like we would for knitting. We're actually going to pick it up in the front and tension it from there. Our tension is going over here towards the left, but we're actually going to be making purl stitches and needing tension to come down to the front. So this is pretty tricky and everyone has different techniques for it. The way that I make my purl stitches, and I don't do this very often, but I will pull my pointer finger down to give myself some tension down. So if this is gonna, it's probably gonna feel really awkward, but just keep giving it a try and pulling your finger down to the front. All right, let's actually begin to make our purl stitch. Okay, all we've done is crossed to the front and picked up our yarn. Now it's time to actually pick that yarn and put it around the needle. So kind of make a swivel towards the back in order to pick your yarn. Again, swivel back and pick your yarn. Your yarn is wrapping from the front over and around. Over and around. Now here's the tricky part. I need to come back this way, but as you can see, my tension is not really going to allow me to do that. So that's when I bring this finger forward. For my first stitch, I really need a lot of help from my right hand to push that stitch back through. So I'm going to scooch down, and then I need to scoop through. Again, I'm scooting down and scooping through. Then I'm going to slide that stitch off onto my right hand needle. Again, I need some assistance from my right hand, and get set up again. Let me show you this a couple more times so you can really see how it's done. I've dropped my yarn again in the front so that I can show you how I pick it up. So let's first go into the stitch from right to left and cross to the front. Then pinch your needles with your right hand. You won't need to do this every time, but I wanted to show it to you again. Make sure you're picking up your yarn in the front and then tensioning it. Okay, now we're ready to make our purl stitch. We've just gone into the stitch from right to left, cross in the front. Now we're going to pick our yarn, and then we're going to push our finger down to give us tension. That's when we need to scoop through to the back and then slide that stitch off. All right, our yarn stays in the front here when we're purling the whole time. So go into the stitch from right to left, pick that yarn, create your tension, slide and scoop, and slide off. Again, that yarn needs to stay in the front. Go into the stitch from right to left, pick your yarn, create your tension, slide and scoop, and slide that stitch off. Continue to purl across. I'm very slow at this, and it's okay. You'll figure out your tension in time. I've made it across to my very last stitch. It's hiding under there. So I'm going to go ahead and make that stitch from right to left, cross into the front, pick your yarn, scoop through, and slide off. Now all we need to do to start the second row is just switch our hands. The empty needle goes into the right hand. The needle with all the stitches on it goes into the left hand. So let's drop that needle and check on these stitches real quick. Just kind of uncurl them if they are curled. You might want to count again. 5, 10, 15. Make sure the same number of stitches are still there that you had before. And then let's get set up to start our second row. Make sure your yarn is out to the front. Pick up that empty needle and let's get started. Cross from right to left into the front. Pick up your yarn in the front and get it tensioned. And then we're going to scoop, pull down to hold tension, slide it back through. That first stitch is hard, and slide off. That first stitch is really hard. All right, let's go ahead. If you need to reset your tension, you definitely can. All right, next stitch, go from right to left, cross to the front, scoop your yarn, create your tension, slide down, and scoop to the back. Continue across for the second row. Now let's work the purl stitch on circular needles. It's exactly the same as on straight needles. I'm just going to give you a couple tips as to not get tangled in your cord. Make a slip knot and then pick up one needle and long tail cast on until you have 15 total stitches. If you need any help with those techniques, just look for the long tail cast on video in the description box below. Now that I'm done casting on, I'm just going to put the needle full of stitches in my left hand and get that crazy empty needle into my right hand. Now you may discover a problem here when you start to purl because your yarn is actually going to get trapped underneath that cord. The solution to that is to take the empty needle and dive it underneath your yarn. Then your yarn is free to be in the front and you're ready to purl. Now we can work the purl stitch just like we did on straight needles. With that empty right hand needle, go ahead and dive into the first stitch from right to left and cross in the front. Pick up your yarn in the front and get it tensioned. Then you're going to pick your yarn, tension it, and then slide down, scoop to the back, and slide it off. If you need to readjust after that first stitch, it's perfectly okay. Then we're going into the second stitch here. Cross to the front, pick your yarn, tension it, and then slide off to the back. Just continue on like we did on straight needles. Now you know how to work the purl stitch on both straight and circular needles. Here's a little taste of what it looks like to work a row of knitting and then a row of purling. This over here is the purl side. All of these are purl bumps. So when we see this side, we would know to purl. On this side, we've got the knit side. All of these are knit stitches or knitted V's, and we would know to knit on this side. When you're ready, you might want to try out the next video, which is combining knitting and purling within one row.